now we've come to the point where we're going to try to assemble the mounting brackets for the power steering pump and the alternator. Now it sounds like it should be easy to do. What makes this particularly interesting is that at the time that this was disassembled, Linda and I were joined with our son Joe and our good friend Tim, and it was Tim and Joe who pulled apart the power steering pump. And I was listening to them as Tim was describing what had to happen. I watched from the other side of the car as they struggled, but I didn't take close note of what they were doing, figuring I could make sense of it later. I think I did. Here is a mounting plate that had come off of the vehicle so the power steering pump could be taken away from the water pump. And here's how this works. At the top left and bottom left, two mounting bolts go into the water pump into threaded bosses, B-O-S-S-E-S. When they go clamped down, here goes another mounting bolt that goes into the power steering mounting bracket behind the pulley, and it has a crescent shape to it so it can be adjusted to snug up the drive belt. Here's where the trouble is. If you take a look, there's a bolt here. This bolt first goes through this plate, then through the other mounting bracket and back into cylinder head into another mounting boss. The challenge is that the power steering pump, even though it's not terribly heavy, it's heavy enough in an awkward enough position where once this bolt gets pulled out, it's going to be very difficult to get it through here, and back in the mounting boss in a one smooth swoop. So we're going to be going off camera as Linda hopefully is helping me with this. It's not necessarily a two-person job, but I think two people make it less difficult. Nothing makes it easier. Well, through the magic of video editing and Linda at the video control, we spared you the grief that she and I went through getting this bracket in place. These two bolts going into the water pump bosses that are threaded are a smaller diameter than the two bolts that go into the mounting brace for the power steering pump. Well, I knew that, but I had to rediscover it. Anyway, once we got things lined up, which took a lot of effort on Linda's part especially, I got all four bolts threaded. Most important bolt being all four of them, but of the four, the one that is now most crucial is going to become this one at the bottom right, looking from the front of the vehicle back, because there is a little arc slot in there that's used to adjust the tension of the drive belt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snug down the three primary mounting bolts going into the water pump bosses and the cylinder head boss, leaving this one slightly loose. I'm going to put a new drive belt on the power steering pump pulley and on the vibration dampener rear pulley. There's two pulleys on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten up that belt and lock down this fourth bolt. Probably do the whole thing off camera because it's fairly easy to do, and I might need Linda's help. 3 or 4 hands are sometimes better than 1 or 2. So we'll see you back in a few minutes, hopefully with this done without any issues. Okay, I was able to lock down and tighten these 3 bracket mounting bolts. This adjusting bolt is still a bit loose, and I started putting on the belt, drive belt that goes from the water pump to the vibration dampener or harmonic balancer there's two pulleys, one in the back or one in the front. You want the back pulley. It goes to the power steering pump pulley, and we added air conditioning to this car last summer of 2019. And so this belt is not a standard size belt for this vehicle. I had the previous belt, which was new with the air conditioning system, and I took it to the parts store and had them size it for the correct circumference and the correct V angle and correct width. So I took a picture of the receipt that shows the part numbers for these belts. So in the future, because I'm going to record that information on our computer, I'll know what size belt to get in case this ever gets thrown and I don't have the pieces to bring in to have them size it. Now I've put the pulleys involved together with the V-belt I'm about to put around the power steering pump, and then I'm going to apply some upward pressure on the pump to tighten the belt. I'm going to lock down the adjusting bolts. That's all real easy stuff. It's not rocket science. There's no need to over tighten a belt. Having it too loose can be a problem. Having it too tight can cause bearings in the parts that are being driven by the belt to wear. So I don't want to put extreme pressure on the power steering front bearing or the air conditioning front bearing or on the water pump shaft. So I'm going to be considerate of what has to be done, do what has to be done, and then when we come back I'll show you how I check that out. We'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, power steering bolts are in place and tightened down. The drive belt is in place, but Linda came up with an interesting little trick. In order to get the power steering adjustment bolt up where the power steering could go up as far as we could get it, we had to find a way to pick that pump up on its pivot point. Linda and I couldn't get underneath the pump, it's too tight. She came up with a great idea. She got a nylon rope, actually it's a dog leash, wrap it around the pump, threw a little loop at the end, and she pulled like hell as I tightened down the adjustment bolt. Now the nice thing about this is it gave her some pretty good leverage because of the way she oriented how the loop went, and it did not put pressure on the housing of the power steering pump, which is sheet metal that's formed, and if I put a pry bar in there to try to pry the pump up and tighten it, it would have possibly bent the housing or dented it, and we don't want that either because it could end up causing problems down the road. But the belt was still too loose. Way too much play. How did that happen? I can't make it any tighter off the power steering bracket. Adjusting bolt is as far over as it can go. Well, here's how. This is an aftermarket air conditioning system. I'm going to move some things and have Linda take a picture of the mounting bracket way over here. And there is an adjusting bolt here that is used to tighten that up. We loosened it the other day during teardown in order to be able to get that belt off. So unlike a factory design system, there are two places to make an adjustment from, one of which doesn't work well without the other. So we're going to go back off camera. I'm going to tighten up the belt where it needs to be. Then I'll show you how I know the belt is tight enough. Back in a few moments. I tightened up the other adjusting bolt with the air conditioning bracket. There's two nuts, one below the plate, one above.
I'm not finding it.
It's the nut above. I turned as this belt got tighter. Now when I press on belt, there's a slight deflection. Now there are belt tensiometers on the market intended to measure how tight a belt is supposed to be, but you need to have the factory specs to know if it's going to mean anything. I have a more practical approach, one that has been working for me for years. I'm going to take a box end wrench and I'm going to put it on, whoops, wrong size. That one right there. I'm going to put it on one of these bolts, still the wrong size. Hold on, 7/16.
You want 7/16?
If we have one.
I got 9/16 here.
Hold on. I guess we'll be back. In a previous clip, I talked about a shop instructor who told me he's not supposed to tell us to use a tool for something it's not designed for, except the screwdriver. It can be used for a lot of things. A punch, a lever, a screwdriver, or in this case, a test lever. I'm going to jam the screwdriver down between this bolt and the center shaft and see if I can turn this pump pulley easily. If I can, it's too loose. I'm putting a lot of pressure on it. I can barely turn it. That's adequate. Now, that's worked for me for years. If I get to the point where I can't turn it at all, it's probably too tight. On the other hand, if I'm driving the car and I turn the steering wheel so the power steering pump starts to apply pressure and I hear the belt squeal, then I have to tighten it up a little bit more. Easy enough to do. I'd rather have it be a little bit too loose and yet somewhat tight than too tight and cause a problem with front bearings on the very expensive compressor or very hard to find power steering pump, or have to replace a little water pump because front bushing wore out. I don't need that. So now that I know I have that adequately tight, next thing I got to do is lock that thing down. There is a bolt going all the way through with a nut. It's a jam nut. So what I gotta do to make sure this doesn't move is run that nut up against this plate and tighten it. And that way it won't come apart later from loosening up, or at least it shouldn't. It doesn't take a lot of pressure. This is one of those things where tight enough is tight enough. You can't really get it too tight. The bolt that thick is going to be very hard to break from over tightening. You strip the nut first. Even I'm not that strong. Not without the 5-foot pry bar extension. Okay, that's not going anywhere.
Can we get closer? Because I don't think I really showed it. I'm at the wrong side of the camera. Can you point to what nut it was?
This is the jam nut. I don't know if Linda can get that. Right underneath this plate.
Okay, got it.
We'll be back. Now we're coming to the part where we're dealing with the alternator, getting it back in place. Before I do, for anybody who's concerned and didn't catch very open when I tore this thing apart, take a look at the top of the battery and you'll see I have disconnected the negative battery post from the negative cable. So if I have any wires that have positive current touch the metal frame, it will not cause a ground circuit. The electrical circuits in this car are dead. About the only thing I can do to cause a problem electrically right now is to put metal between these two posts directly. That would be hard to do because of this pull down is up so high. Anything that is straight would hit this and it would never be able to touch that post. Maybe it's on purpose, maybe it's accidental. I don't care. We're safe. Anyway, the reason I say that is that alternator is always a bear to get back in place. It's hard enough getting it apart. Part of the problem is the top part of the mounting bracket has a big bolt that goes through what I call an ear of the alternator, passes through. There's an aluminum spacer, then it goes through a small hole down for the dipstick and into the cylinder head mounting boss. Then I can't do that until I take off one of the bolts I put in for the water pump yesterday. This bolt right here. The reason for that is this piece of the alternator bracket goes underneath there. That helps hold it in place. Did I know that yesterday when I put this together? Yes, I was very well aware it was going to be coming apart again. It's not a problem. It's the nature of the beast. Down here, that actually connects to another piece of bracketing being used to hold the alternator in place for the adjustment, belt adjustment down below. That's a real bear to get back in place. We're going to go off camera. I can get this thing put together and then we'll be back again. Okay, between where we left off in the previous video clip and this current session, we've been busy. If you take a look, you'll see that alternator mounting bracket is in place above and below, and the bracket for mounting the power steering pump is in place. All bolts are tightened down. Water pump is all tightened down. Bypass hose is tightened down with clamps. Now, if anybody was watching carefully, they saw the heater hose had been in place for the heater core coming from the water pump. I took it back off. Why would I do that? Well, when we drop in the radiator and hook up the radiator hoses, shortly after that, I plan to start putting coolant, antifreeze, in the radiator, and as I pour it in, the coolant will go in through the lower radiator hose inlet for the water pump at the end of the light here and start to fill the engine block and the cylinder head water jackets or coolant jackets. If I have this attached, the thermostat will be closed and you'll have an air bubble inside, and so the liquid coolant will only go in so far and no further because of the air trapping it. So in order to bleed out the air, I need to get to a place not affected by this thermostat being closed off. Heater hose. I take this off, air escapes from here, I pour in the coolant until I see it start to bubble out of this. I put this in place and tighten it down, and now when we start the engine, it doesn't start with a bunch of air in the cooling jackets. It has coolant in there like it's supposed to. More than one person has put stress on an engine and even caused severe damage by not properly bleeding or burping the system of air like that. The other way to do that on some engines is to take off the bypass hose at one end or the other and bleed the air out that way. This hose is such tight confinement areas as to keep us from doing that easily. That is really hard to get off and back on with a water pump attached like that, which is why I replaced it when I did. I don't want to have a problem with that later. Okay, we're going to go ahead and suspend videotaping until after we put in the aluminum radiator, which Linda will take a picture of in a moment. Once that's dropped into place, we'll come back and have Linda videotape me securing them and putting in the radiator hoses and otherwise preparing the cooling system for its final assembling. The aluminum radiator, I'm about to drop it into place. Linda will get down with the camera to show you the saddle on the left or right side. I'm going to hopefully be able to drop this into. If I'm real lucky, I can do it in one shot and it'll all fit. It fit properly in the Mach 1, also 73 Mustang. No reason it shouldn't fit here. Having said that, now I jinxed it.
Get these pipes in the way. Okay, we're clear now.
I know where I jinxed. Why won't the radiator fit? With the old radiator, I put in this coolant overflow tank, and with the new radiator, it's about 2 inches wider than the old one, so I've got to relocate this tank. So I have to move it, and then we can start the radiator again. So I'll see you back when it's done. We'll take a picture of where the coolant overflow canister is. I moved it upright because there's coolant in there. Now the radiator should be able to drop right into place. This time for sure. And looking good. So now what I hope to do is to locate the mounting holes that this overflow canister had been attached to and see if they are now clear. Oh no, no room. This end tank is a lot further out because this radiator is both wider and thicker than the original radiator. This is what they call a 3-row radiator, where there are 3 rows of cooling tubes going up and down across a wider frame, and that's fine because that gives us more cooling capacity, which is part of what I was after. Not that I was having a problem. So what I'm looking for now is to make sure I'm not rubbing any metal on the aluminum radiator against any other component in the car. Aluminum is soft. If it rubs against regular metal, I could wear a hole through there. These things are too expensive to do that.
Turn that light there. Okay.
Much too nice. So now the question is going to be, where am I going to mount that overflow tank? I'm not sure yet, but probably in front of the radiator support on the car. If I can get past all that air conditioning equipment, I'll figure that out later. That is not an original piece of equipment. The original car had no such device. So if I don't have one later, I'm not going to worry about it. I just prefer to have a coolant capture recovery device. Okay, so now this is in place. Now I got to lock it down. The original radiator had 2 clamps up on top with bolts. I'm going to reuse those. Now in the Mach 1, I painted these. I'm not going to worry about that with this. I just want this to be, right now, functional. So, this is a little bit deep for this radiator, so it could look a little goofy. There's a bolt back there somewhere. Black one, thank you.
There's a washer. Okay.
Yeah, it's staked in, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this in place a little bit. Oh, that's something else.
Yeah.
I have the other bracket over here. And once I get these brackets in place, I'll lock it down. What I did for the Mach 1 is I got another set of brackets that were a little bit shorter, so I didn't have so much overhang here. But functionally, once this is bolted down, I don't care if there's an overhang or not. It'll work just fine. I'm after functionality first, presentation second. Yeah. Here's the other upper bracket, mounting bracket. And it's pretty obvious that this radiator, even though it has 3 rows of cooling tubes instead of 2, it is not as thick as the original radiator. I don't know why, just the way they were built back then. Actually, what happened is that the upper and lower tanks, or side tanks in that radiator, were extra thick to accommodate a higher core count of cooling tubes than what we wound up getting. That's all right. All right, time to lock this puppy down. I think Linda noticed off camera, I thought was interesting, and then I remembered the Mach 1 was the same way. This upper radiator mount is not as long as this one. Last time I saw that with the Mach 1 was about 2 years ago, and I simply ordered new mounting brackets, the short ones, cleaned them up, painted them, and used them to replace these so it wouldn't look quite so unusual. But as I mentioned a few moments ago, I'm after functionality right now. This will work. If it tightens down, it'll work. Well, look at all that room in there. That is probably...
You're on the angle though.
You know what? I'm going to move this. Just a little bit. And see if I can grab this. Nope, not enough room. There's an angle here cut in the radiator mount that is keeping this from biting properly. So that's what's going on. I'm going to try to move this a little bit to try to make it better. If it doesn't work out, I'll have to fabricate some mounts. It's not moving any further. Okay, I'm going to keep these in place for now, and I'll fabricate some mounts. I can think of worse things that could happen. That is acting like it's already tightened down, but it's not tightened enough. That is, yet it's still moving around. Okay, it'll be up to this one to hold it in place. Okay, the radiator is not moving. It is being secured at the top by this mount, not this one. I'll deal with that later. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and put in the upper and lower radiator hoses. Now these hoses are not the ones you get at AutoZone or O'Reilly's. These are reproduction hoses that have the original style factory hose clamp stapled into place. This is so it looks like it's more original to the initial build of the vehicle. I did it because I thought it'd be kind of fun. There's nothing functional required with this. Because I grabbed the top hose first, I'll start with the top hose. If this is too hard to put in, I'll use some silicone to lubricate the hose to make it easier to put on. Feels like I gotta loosen those clamps up. Where'd the screwdriver go? That was over here. I think that's too big. There's a smaller one.
Right here.
I see it, thank you. Now this clamp has a head for either a flat tip screwdriver or for a hex nut. Flat tips are a pain in the butt to work with in tight spaces, so I'm going to see if I can find the right size hex nut with a nut driver and start getting ready to use that to make things a little less difficult, especially for the lower hose, because that is going to be a real pain to deal with. Nut driver, wrong size nut for the clamp, so I'll go get the right one, or the correct one. Okay, 5/16. We'll see how this does. Look at that, a place to hold tools. It's all fine, well and good until we put the car together and forget what the tools are and need it later. So even though it works well, I don't necessarily recommend it. Okay, that's being real tight. Can I have you hand me that silicone spray, please? Silicone spray is your friend. It doesn't hurt rubber, plastic, or metal, but you do not want to get on any painted surfaces, because if you ever repaint the car and silicone was on it, it's going to be a real problem for whoever's doing the paint job. And it doesn't take much. Thank you.
You sprayed it in the direction of the car.
I'm not going to repaint this car. And look at that. Goes right on. I'm going to take this old cap off from manufacturing. They put that on to keep crap from getting in there.
Bent the clamp so you could get to it instead
I'm
of
turning
tugging
it so I can get to it because it's in the way of the battery hold down bolt. Okay, that's in place. The clamp is over the rubber on the far side of a small rise. I should have pointed that out. The very end of that inlet for the radiator is a little bit larger diameter than what I'm bolting onto. That way, if this comes under heavy pressure, if the clamps are in place, it's less likely to blow this hose off. There's probably a torque specification for the clamp. For me, tight. Specification enough. Okay. Now for the top one. Do you see a small cord wrench extension up there somewhere? Yes. Perfect. Thank you. This one's a little hard to get to, so I put on a short extension. Makes it a lot easier. This stuff isn't hard as much as it is tedious. Tight. Okay. This little plastic label is not going to hurt anything. I'm going to leave it in place. Lower radiator hose is going to be a bit more of a challenge than the upper. Take off the factory cap. I'm going to loosen up the clamps a little bit. Now, just a little nostalgia. These hoses from the factory, back in the old days, maybe still today, I don't know, would come with a spiral spring, stainless steel I think, non-corrosive, that would go inside the lower hose. Why would they do that? Under the theory that at high revolutions, with a lot of coolant flowing through the engine, this is where suction from the water pump is applied. The concern was, without that spring there, this hose could collapse and choke off coolant needed for the engine. This doesn't have a spring. I don't know if they still do it or not. I always thought it was kind of a silly explanation. So I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to put it together without it, but I'm going to use some silicone spray. Just a little bit, just like before. Something to be careful of, especially if a person smokes. Silicone spray is flammable. In fact, if a person was so inclined to do so, they could actually, with an engine with no fuel in the carburetor, spray it in the carburetor or intake manifold, start the engine, and run the engine with short sprays of silicone. I don't know if it does any damage or anything to the engine. I'm not suggesting anybody do it. I'm just saying it can be done. The lower hose always seems to be a bigger problem than the upper. Nature of the beast.
So it's going in this thing right
It's always
here.
been that way.
It's going in that. This thing.
It has to go behind the hose, but here I have to get down here, and I've got wiring. Oh, I might have this in backwards. I think I do. It's been a long time. That didn't fit correctly. See if this does any better. Yes, it does. The clamp isn't back far enough. I'm going to pull that hose off and show you something on the outlet from the radiator. Inlet is the same way. There's a slight nub, a little more diameter than the rest of the outlet, and that is what I want to get the hose clamp between this and the end of the hose. So it's clamping on the smaller diameter inside. So if it looks like I'm struggling, it's because I want to make sure I get that right. Otherwise, this hose could slide right off. I don't want that to happen. First of all, it'd be embarrassing. It happens, but it would be embarrassing. Second of all, what a pain. And it's so avoidable just by being aware of it and preparing for it. I need a longer extension for this. I'll be back. Lower radiator hose clamp is way out of the way, so I got a bit longer 1/4" drive extension. I say a bit longer, tongue-in-cheek. It's very rare for a 1/4" drive socket for me to use an extension this long. But the few times I've needed it, like here, it has been invaluable. Look at that.
And you tighten it all the way, or do you get the other side on first?
I get this as tight as I can first because it's already pretty well lined up at the other end. If I screw up and have to move it, we'll have it on camera and people see it's okay to make a mistake or to backtrack. What makes sense. I don't mind someone seeing the ugly warts and little back steps I gotta do. I want something realistic. I'm not here to try to impress anybody. Just trying to help and have some fun while I'm having my fun with this stuff. Okay, now down here, that water pump outlet or inlet and hose are ready to be put together. The big thing for me is make sure I orient that clamp bolt in such a manner I can get to it so I can tighten it down like the others. Not so much make it easy to put together, but later, many years from now, whoever inherits this car from us will end up someday having to replace these hoses, if nothing else, as a general maintenance procedure. I don't want to make things difficult for them just because they're not born yet or not driving yet. Who knows, maybe a grandkid will get this, not a great grandkid. I don't know. I don't try to worry about stuff like that. Okay, this is being a problem going on. I'm going to do something a little unusual. I am going to raise this car up in the air and put that on from below and then tighten it from above. So we're going to cut for now, raise the car, and then we'll go from there. We never did have to raise the car. As soon as Linda cut the last video, she says, you know, I can get that. She did. So the hose is in place, the clamp is in position. I'm going to tighten that puppy down and then start filling it with coolant, and then put the transmission cooler lines on. Then we start doing the engine coolant. I'm glad I use a nut driver, not a flat tip screwdriver for this. This is bad enough. And I'm at a bad angle, speaking of bad. So I'm going to reposition. Try a different angle. Professional contortionist. That's what I am. Now, as we tried putting on the lower hose, it wasn't going out, so I had to loosen the clamp up a little bit more. I don't want to loosen it too much because the drive screw and the nut could have come apart, and they're sometimes difficult to put back together without taking the hose off completely. So just be aware. You don't want to get too wild. That's good. Now, this car has an automatic transmission. The oil from the factory is routed through a cooler located inside of the radiator. You can get an external air-cooled oil cooler for heavy duty or high performance purposes, or just to be cool. But in the case of this vehicle, it's a plain vanilla 302. We don't race it around. The nice thing about having coolant that's going in a radiator is in the winter time, it acts as much as a heater as a cooler to make sure we have a minimum temperature for the oil. If we had an external cooler, it's possible it could run too cool and cause other problems. Okay, problem.
You don't hook up.
This upper cooling line will go in where it's supposed to after I get the correct fitting. The lower one is too short, won't fit over there. That's because this radiator is wider than the original. So what I need to do is go get some steel tubing and some fittings and fabricate an extension that requires a few things. First, steel tubing. Part Supply House has it. The other thing is I need to have a flare nut and seat for the end, one end of the extension, and a flare nut for the other. The other thing I need to do is get a tubing bender. You don't just bend this tube by hand. The sidewalls will collapse and you have a kink or you fracture the metal. So special tubing benders, a couple of different designs. The other thing I need is a flare nut kit where I can take steel or copper metal line and I can create a flare nut seat so that it properly seals metal to metal. So I guess we're done for now. I've got to make sure I have my tubing benders and flare nut kit. I used to have them, but I haven't used them for like almost 35 years. Who knows if they're still around. And I will fabricate what I need. The other thing I need to do is on the original radiator, the seat, I forgot to take it off the original radiator and put it in here for these flare nuts to attach to. That was an oversight on my part. I'm glad I had other stuff to do because of the shortness of that one cooling line. That helps me save a little space. Before I do all that though, what I can do, since all the cooling system is in place except the one heater line, I can start to add coolant in here and watch for the coolant to start to come up through the one heater core outlet from the water pump. Once that's done, I know I've got the system burped, bled, and I can stop pouring in coolant, put in that heater line, lock it down, and finish topping this thing off. And then I can pressure test the system to make sure I don't have any leaks anywhere, at least when the engine is cold. Once it warms up, it's possible a leak might come up, but at least I can check for it cold before I get too much further. So I'm gonna start prepping things. See you guys in a few moments. Okay, Linda is going to be watching the heater hose outlet from the water pump, and as soon as she sees coolant burbling up, she's gonna tell me I'll stop pouring this in, put that heater hose on, and continue filling the radiator. I'm using a funnel. Normally I wouldn't, but Linda didn't want me to do anything that looks unusual. I'm using a pre-mixed coolant, 50-50, half water, half coolant, with an ethylene glycol base. I could have saved money by getting full strength coolant and mixing it with our own water, 50-50. In our case, we would have been fine because we have soft water in our house. What the hell? Okay, here's what I mean. Anyone who's had a cooling system problem with scaling and debris inside the radiator probably wonder Where's all that crud coming from? All that scaling? Hard water compounds. Most tap water in our country has hard water deposits dissolved in the tap water. Manganese, calcium, all kinds of stuff. It happens. Some houses like ours, we have soft water systems to take that out so we can enjoy soft water with all the dissolved rock in it. Most folks don't, so they mix their 50-50 themselves. They're using hard water, and over time, those hardness compounds will start to deposit inside the cooling system and radiator and start plugging things up. So why am I using 50-50 premix if I have soft water? I don't want to have to deal with, did I get the 50-50 mix just right? If you don't get enough coolant in there, this will not do a proper job of keeping your coolant from freezing in very cold temperatures, and you could wind up with a cracked engine block or worse. That's pretty bad. Or you could have too low a boiling point and you don't get your protection from overheating boilovers. So I prefer to get a premix from the factory where I don't have to worry about how rich is the mixture and getting a hydrometer and testing it. I've got one, don't want to have to use it. Cooling system of this little engine, it's a small V8, takes a little bit, well, a couple of gallons. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3. This is an extra large radiator, so it'll be more than what factory calls for. I'm going to keep pouring in the first gallon kind of quickly. The second one, though, I'm going to go more carefully because that's when I'm going to start running into Linda saying, I see coolant, stop, stop, stop. We keep the old bottles for old coolant and for old oil for disposal. We hang on to these. Something else I should mention, ethylene glycol is toxic. If a human or an animal like a pet dog, pet cat, drinks it, it'll cause kidney failure, and it has been known to kill people. It used to be in the old days, ethylene glycol being sold had a sweet taste to it. I don't know why. Someone do it on purpose? Maybe. I have heard that lately there are legislative pieces out there that tell folks you can't do that anymore. It has to have a bittering compound in it, so nobody drinks it.
So why is he checking all of these? Because I told him the last radiator they did, I'm pretty sure he and his son put all the waste back where the new ones were, and he had to sort through which ones were waste antifreeze and which ones were the new ones.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he's found a second gallon.
Won't be enough. I'll have to go and buy some more.
Oh,
But it'll do what we need it to do. That's fill it enough for you to see coolant coming out there. So we can shove that heater hose in place and pressure test the system to see overall how I've done reassembling this
even
without
without
problem.
those lines there that we need to redo, you can test it?
Yes, those are oil transmission cooling lines. They go into an inner tank,
Okay.
completely separate from the cooling system with liquid.
Back to watching.
Should be coming up pretty soon.
Okay, I see bubbles coming up. It's not there yet, but I see
Will
it.
be. You've seen the beginning. Now I'll slow down.
I see bubbles, it's not. Okay, here it comes. I don't know how far it's supposed to go.
Up to the very top of the outlet.
Okay, keep going, it's got like a 1/4 inch to go.
Good, because I'm almost out of coolant.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Too late. How much spilled?
Nothing.
Oh, that's too bad. That would have been fun.
Hopefully that's far enough, I think.
If you can see it, it's fine.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Good.
Did you get a shot of that?
Oh yeah, I saw it coming up.
Did you get a picture of it though with the video?
No.
Take a picture so folks see what
So
we're
while
looking
on video
for.
and take a picture?
I'll point with my finger. See them getting in closer. See where the coolant is in the outlet? Port 4. The coolant.
I'm not videoing. You want to
Put the heater hose back on the water pump outlet and tighten that down. Okay, it's in place. I think this is the correct size nut driver. If it isn't, then I'll get a different one. Nope, too small. Can you pass me
didn't get on
that gray
it.
box?
You were on it.
I can tell.
You were hitting the metal brace.
Yeah. That's what was on it before, I think. Could you snap that shut in case it falls? Thank you.